Why is it that some Christians today hold that the only good translation of the Bible is the one that was completed way back in the year 1611? Well, Dr. Samuel Gipp, our first guest to speak, believes the 1611 King James was not only good, it was perfect. In fact, it was specially protected by God. Listen. Why do you believe, Sam, that the King James Version of the Bible is the only perfect translation today? And what's more, that if these guys were going to do a translation into Swedish or Ethiopian or some other language, that they're not to use any of the Greek text, but they're to use the 1611 English text to translate those other versions. Why?
Well, the first reason, of course, picking the Bible above all books that are called holy books, I accept the Bible academically because of fulfilled prophecy. Now, when I give the Bible that inspiration from God, then I take its statements on itself as far as inspiration and preservation. Now, at that point, it's got to become a argument of faith, not academics. In other words, you're going to find places where the King James Bible doesn't agree with even the Textus Receptus or something like that. So I believe the King James Bible is the preserved Word of God. I don't call it the inspired Word of God. I call it the preserved Word of God. And English is without a doubt the language of the world. It is the language of missions in this world today.
So if a guy's in Russia and he wants to really get to the truth of the Word of God, would he have to learn English?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let me go to Don Wilkins over there, NASB. What do you think of that?
Well, not very much. I don't want to be cruel or mean or anything, but then the problem that I think a lot of us would have would be why not the Latin Vulgate, why not some of the old versions? They're older than the King James, they've been around a lot longer than 1611, and if it's just a matter of faith beyond preservation, it seems to me I could have more faith in them.
Now, what I've mentioned was that there's a world language now. It is common knowledge, even Russian airline pilots learn English. Everybody learns English somewhere along the line. We talk about the strong economy of Japan, but they learn English for business purposes. English is a language that permeates the world. Latin's a dead language. And so to have preserved it in Latin would have been rather useless. Preserving it in English.
All right, let me just get in here. James, you've written a whole book on this. What do you think about this, of the fact that God preserved only the English, 1611?
Well, it's really interesting to me that when we look back at church history, we discover that many of the same arguments that are presented by King James only advocates today were the arguments that were placed against the very man who is primarily responsible for the Greek text from which the King James is translated, known today as the Textus Receptus, a man by the name of Desiderius Erasmus. When Erasmus produced his Greek text, many of the same arguments were used. First of all, the church for 1100 years had used what became known as the Latin Vulgate. And the argument was made, look, you have the verdict of history. The church has used this. Why are you using the language of the Greeks? The Greeks are heretics. God's true church. And really, they used the argument of faith, and they felt that the Scriptures supported their argument from faith. I believe that we need to look at this whole situation and recognize the same things that the King James translators recognized themselves. That is that they were producing a translation, they were looking at all sorts of different sources, they recognized the need for revision. They never claimed that their work was the be-all and end-all of all things. And I really think that it's interesting that I believe Erasmus, who originated the Greek text that we will obviously be discussing, and the translators of the King James would agree with my perspective, and that is that as more information comes to light, as further discoveries are made, that this information should be utilized by Christians to produce ever better translations of the Word of God.